We're going to kick this off right away. So welcome, everyone. I am so happy that you're here today to continue our discussion around the evolution of DMCs and how to develop sustainable business practices. Allow me to do a brief recap on how we got here today. During the pandemic, we were all looking at ways to improve our business practices. Some DMCs learned the hard way that their current practices were endangering their business's sustainability. ADMEI and DMC coalition leaders met multiple times dating back to May 2020, sharing ideas and coordinating activities to reduce duplicate effort and provide the most value to the industry. Together, we developed a multi-phase communication plan to release important concepts to the marketplace. As you know, a few weeks ago, ADMEI released the Evolution of a DMC white paper. In this first phase, ADMEI's white paper reiterated the DMC value. It also shared some best practices for sustainable DMC business model, especially in the areas of proposal process, the use of letter of engagement or letter of intent, and about site inspection policies. After our introductory webinar and the deep dive roundtable that followed, many industry partners shared our information to their constituents. Associations like PCMA, SITE, IRF, and FICP, just to name a few, have posted, published, or at very least given visibility, and to a certain extent, shall I say, endorsement to our piece. Our blog article was picked up and shared by a number of news organizations, consortia, and curated newsletters. There is a lot of positive energy out there, and you can rest assured that we will leave no stone unturned to amplify the message as much as we can. Today, we are transitioning to phase 2, and we are focusing on some additional concepts outlined in the thesis co-authored by Paul Cottadella, founder of the DMC Coalition, and the ADMEI focus group that developed the Evolution of a DMC white paper. Many or most of you know Paul. His law practice, Cottadella Law, is also an ADMEI corporate sponsor and worked with ADMEI to update our contract service agreement in 2020. The thesis title is 2021, the Advancement of Destination Management Companies. And the concepts that we'll be focusing on today include the definition of the life cycle of an event, time tracking, revision of pricing models, and recommended nomenclature. And of course, the benefits to using these practices. To help us do that, we have assembled a fantastic panel for this discussion and sharing of ideas. Today we have Candy Visconti, DMCP. Candy is a partner at Eventis Destination Services in California. Hello, Candy. We have Jill Tate, DMCP. Jill is CEO and founding partner at Corinthian Events, a DMC network company in Massachusetts. Paul Miller, CIS-CITP. Paul is Managing Director at Spectra in the UK. Robin Bass, DMCP. Robin is the founder at Maple Ridge Events, powered by ES in Tennessee. And last but certainly not least, Paul Cottadella, founder of the DMC Coalition and principal attorney at Cottadella Law in California. So welcome all, and thank you for participating today. And thank you to our viewers as well. I know some of you submitted questions during the registration process. If time allows, we'll be happy to answer them at the end of the webinar. For any other questions that come up during the discussion, please enter them in the Q&A area. We will do our best to address all questions today, but if we run out of time, we'll follow up after the webinar with more information. So let's get started, okay? Let's start with Paul Cottadella. Paul, as a DMC professional and as an attorney, you certainly are in a privileged position to approach some of the topics included in the thesis. So why don't you tell us about your experience and provide an overview of the concepts that we are covering today?
Absolutely. Thank you for the introduction, Lorenzo. And I am a lawyer by trade, but everyone on here, please don't hold that against me. I've been a litigation and commercial transactions attorney for nearly 10 years now. And within that span of time, I've worked as a general counsel and a general manager for a national DMC. Some of you may have attended my sessions over the years at ADMEI, their conferences. We may have worked together on particular matters, or you may be a member of the DMC Coalition. I'll spare you the longer version of the story. What I really want to convey is sort of unique perspective and experience that I've had over the course of this pandemic. For better or for worse, I was at the epicenter of what was taking place. I've been working with DMCs all over the globe, listening to their concerns, negotiating with clients, third parties, trying to get reasonable outcomes, their opposing counsels, and even vendors talking about their grievances and how they're working with DMCs. Because of these interactions, coupled with my experience with you all, the DMC Coalition emerged. DMC Coalition, or DMCC, we're an organization comprised of DMCs that are simply passionate about the betterment of the industry. And we've assembled since early last year. Over this past year, we've routinely met to discuss these issues. And in conjunction with ADMEI, we've developed the subject of today's webinar. So before we get into it, everybody, please keep in mind these 4 points. They're very important for the sake of what we're about to discuss here today. First off, this webinar is intended for all DMC professionals. Okay, since early last year, mostly owners and executives have been involved in developing these concepts. And we realize that this may be the first time some of you are being introduced to these ideas. Most importantly, it's imperative that all DMC professionals, AEs, sales personnel, operations teams, account managers, everyone, you have to know and understand these principles so that you can apply it to the conversations you're having with your clients. For that reason, we're going to do our best to speak to the broader audience and, of course, encourage as many questions as possible. Second, the proposed solutions referenced in this thesis are actually being utilized today, and they are working. When this thesis was originally drafted, many of its ideas and its proposed solutions were theories. They were these sort of unproven ideas, right? After having worked directly with members of the DMC Coalition and other DMCs throughout this industry, I can assure you that everything we discuss today has actually been put into practice. It's currently being used and has been well received from clients, third parties, and the like. And we'll provide some more real life experiences of that a little bit later on. Third, the more DMCs that adopt these ideas and implement these into their processes, I believe the more the industry will benefit as a whole. In my mind, it's simple. The more DMCs introduce these ideas and practices into their business and communicate them to their clients, the more normalized it becomes. The more normalized it becomes, the more widely accepted it becomes. Before we know it, we have an improved way of doing business that becomes sort of the new way of doing business. And I think that would have an immense impact. I know it's easy to fall back on what we know because it's familiar. What's familiar is easy. And change is certainly not going to happen overnight. I'm fully aware of that. We all are. But we do urge you to strongly consider what we're about to discuss. Lastly, what is the general spirit and intent of this thesis and its proposed solutions? In a nutshell, we're recognizing long-standing issues worthy of improvement within the DMC industry and acknowledging the negative effects that the pandemic had on our industry and using that experience as a catalyst for change. The change is grounded in creating really two things: mutually beneficial terms between the DMC and its clients, and the fostering of healthy and transparent client communications. Clients demand a more consultative experience now and a clearer understanding of their relationships and their obligations with DMCs. I think that DMCs then must be prepared to discuss their concerns and be proactive in addressing them. To help us provide some more detail around exactly what I mean by that, I'm going to pass this off to my good friend, Candy. Candy, can you talk to us a little bit about the program lifecycle and what was explained in the thesis?
Yes, thanks, Paul. Happy to do that. All of us who have been DMCs, whether for a short time or a long time, certainly understand what the DMC program cycle is and most of the steps that go into it. But the purpose of talking about it specifically today is so that we can literally see and understand where some of these new conversations should take place and how then we can adopt these as best practices moving forward, as are being advocated by ADMEI and DMCC. So we prepared a diagram. Hopefully that will come up soon so we can all see it, that outlines the 4 stages of a program cycle. There we go. Thank you. And again, this should look familiar to all of us, but I wanted to go through the 4 stages to specifically talk about some of the points to get familiar with and in changing your conversations. So stage 1 is possibly one of the most important stages. It could probably literally be called Get to Know Me. I'm a DMC, and these are the things you should know about me and my company. And from the client's point of view, the client should be saying to us, get to know me. I could be your client, and you need to know my program needs. So you can look quickly at the steps here. There are things that are familiar to us, but especially post-pandemic, some of the clients' needs might be changing. Some of us as DMCs are emerging with new companies, new practices, new pivot involvement. So really, we're advocating spend a lot of time on stage 1 in introducing your capabilities to your clients. And notice that what's included is things we're already familiar with, our initial site visits and our preliminary proposals, nothing new. But the shift that we're suggesting in stage 1 is to recognize that it is an introductory stage and stop short of sending out a full program proposal at this stage. So moving then into stage 2, which is just a shift in our mind, the best practices here is to recognize that you are going to now move to a stage where you want to design and produce a full program outline for your client. And whether it is you suggesting to the client it's time to move to this next development of an outline, or the client asking you, this is a very important time to have a good communication with your client about this move to stage 2. This can be, notice at the bottom of the stage 2 where there's a time span, this stage 2 can be either really, really short, because we know those clients that say, I've got to get this all done in a week, please turn around that in-depth proposal and get it out to me. Or it can span from 3 months to 6 months to 18 months, maybe a year. It's not, the significance of stage 2 is not so much how much time it takes, but it's what is being accomplished throughout this stage. This step requires a significant amount of time from your teams, and it also requires a significant amount of your expertise. So we're really advocating that all DMCs take this stage 2 as an understanding it very completely and recognize the value. The best practice then is explaining the value to your client in those important conversations, and also beginning to have conversations about collecting some of the fees that we will be charging our clients starting within this stage, which is a big shift for most of us. I also want to point out that you'll notice in the diagram, in the column between stage 1 and 2, we mention a letter of intent and an SOW. This is a subject we'll be talking about next, but just to notice the placement of it, because it will become an important consideration for you as you're moving through these stages. And then we get ready to move into stage 3. And again, you'll notice that column where it talks about your service agreement and your contract terms. Again, those best practices have already been in place for a long time with all of us, to be sure that you're getting a contract in place before you start the final coordination of all your services for your client and then the execution. But my point in mentioning it right now is to say you don't have to wait until you're finished with stage 2 to introduce a service agreement. This is the flexible part that if you're able to bring it in at the beginning of stage 2 or at any point in between, go ahead and do it. But just be sure you've got that in place before you go into stage 3. And we go into stage 3, there's not too much that is new about that. It is simply the time span just before the program dates, where I guess it would be called all ops on deck. And then moving through the execution, of course, you go into stage 4, which is the invoicing stage. So we hope that in reviewing the steps and outlining visually for you these stages, it will help bring us all to an industry-based agreement of the steps that are to be considered best practices. And it'll also serve as a good reference for you as a DMC professional as you begin to incorporate the conversations that you'll want to be having with clients. And we will be just that much closer to incorporating these great new practices. So thank you.
Candy, thank you very much for this first introduction to the life cycle. And as you said, it's something that we've done forever and ever, right? But seeing it in one, page with these different stages, it really helps and probably gives us a new tool and a new resource to refer to, and hopefully to start the conversations with our clients, saying, "Hey, this is where." We're falling short. So I think this is an excellent piece. And I have a question for you. Do you think that this model would stay in place also in the case you have a repeat client?
Thank Lorenzo. That's a really good question. And, as with any conversation that we have, all of our clients are different, and all of their scope of work and their needs are different. All of our destinations are different. But I would say for a repeat client, assuming that you have a good relationship with that repeat client, you would probably move a little bit closer from stage 1 into stage 2. And you, as the sales manager or AE who's in charge of your conversations, you decide where you want to bring in the conversation about a service agreement, the contract terms, and perhaps a new way of outlining the fees, the deposits, to include the fees a little bit earlier. I think some of those conversations with our repeat clients are going to be the most fun or the most frustrating, perhaps the most challenging, but that is why we need to be sure we're all on the same page and we're all having the same understanding about what those conversations need to be.
All right, so as much as the 4 stages are sort of fixed, then it's really flexible, the time span and the way we shift from one to the other at the speed and the pace that we have, depending on different clients. All right, very clear. And I'd like to pick Paul Miller's brain a little bit on this as well, because I'd like to add a little bit of international perspective. Paul, do you think that this applies, I am a non-US DMC as well, but like to hear you on this. Do you think that this would apply globally?
I think it's good to say that it could apply globally, but at the same time, it doesn't have to be exactly the way that it's mapped out right now. It needs a conversation. A lot of our European clients sometimes really don't even like those big, heavy contracting documents. But I think it's not really about changing anything that we really do. It's actually having the conversation to actually bring the payment process a little bit forward, more forward than we would normally have for the work that we're being, the work that we do. And so I think that although some of us might look at this and be a little bit nervous and a little bit scared and think, what, my client will not look at this and I can't have that conversation, it just might be worth just like deep breath and thinking, you know what, we do a lot of work before we're procured, if you like, or we're told that we have the business, or still have to keep redoing proposals, and that takes time and that takes money, as we all know. And so therefore, what's wrong with just having that initial conversation just to sound everyone out, to see it actually may help the client understand a little bit more for their budgeting reasons and purposes as to when finances are released, etc., etc. So to see it all 1, 2, 3, and 4, most of it is, we all know that this is what we do anyway, but at the same time, I think it's good to see stage 1, we know that we win the business, and then stage 2, it's like, well, let's start talking about how much we get, how much we are remunerated for the work that we're doing before stage 3. I think that's a good thing.
Excellent. So actually, we're going to talk about pricing models and time tracking, all of that later on. And I think that this is really the core of the conversation that we are approaching. But I think that, as you said, having this visual tool could probably help all the DMCs globally to start that conversation. And then you can move it. It's flexible. It's a tool that can be modified according to the needs, but at least sets a baseline that hopefully will be agreed by the whole industry. All right, so excellent. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Candy, for this. So in a perfect word, when we deal with repeating clients, the service agreement should be signed off pretty early in the process, but we know that this is not really the world that we are living in. Oftentimes, the service agreement is signed after months, as Candy was saying, of work and multiple proposal revisions. Yes, multiple. We know that, right? So this is really the case where the letter of intent or letter of engagement, we now have these two labels, come in play, right? So I would like to invite Jill on stage. If you'd like to give us a short overview on this topic of the letter of intent. You're on mute. You are on mute.
Dang. Anyway, thanks so much, Lorenzo. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with everybody today. I had a peek at the list of attendees, and it's just so exciting to me to see all the people from around the world and see all of my friends' names that I miss so dearly. But now we'll go right to the big part of this letter of intent. I am super excited about the letter of intent. We've been talking about it for a long time and trying to figure out what the biggest change is that we need to bring. And I really think that the letter of intent or letter of engagement is a crucial bridge that will take us from a high-level proposal to a commitment that will allow us to ensure that we're paid for our intellectual property, creativity, and design skills. We talked about it before that, as a designer, that we don't want to really give away everything in the first round. So that first proposal is a high-level proposal showing off our qualifications, et cetera. And then we can bring this letter of intent in to really solidify the relationship so that we can dig in and spend even more time with all of those proposal revisions that we know happen, that Lorenzo was speaking of, and so forth. So, we as a group had a lot of discussion on the use of the letter of intent, and we discussed, and Candace said it again, that, it seems quite logical to use it mostly in a bid situation or when you have brand new clients and you don't really have that solid working relationship yet where you have already built the trust quotient between you and your client. It seems pretty logical, but I would also say that as you're rethinking how you're doing this, that there's no harm in introducing this as a concept with your repeat clients that you've had for a long time. I think that we all know that, that it's relationship driven, but as we learned the hard way when the pandemic hit, if we didn't have anything in writing, even with those trusted clients, sometimes we weren't able to recover any of our dollars or the time and money spent. So I think that, in my company, we often find reasons not to, or an excuse not to use something, because as I think Paul and Lorenzo said, change is hard. It's not easy to go forward and have this big change. And when we were on our calls, Deirdre said, I'm going to test out these conversations on my trusted clients, the ones that I can have give me feedback and say, yeah, I totally get that letter of intent. I know why you're using it. That was really well explained. Or I'm still really confused about why we need this when we haven't had it in the past. So my sense is to try to find reasons to use it rather than reasons not to use it, because it's just another layer of protection that you had. I think that having that letter of intent is just that extra letter or that extra level of insulation that we all can have, because we also know that post-pandemic, people's positions are very volatile. People have moved around, they're in new companies, they have new management, and that also always puts us at risk. And that goes for any day. It's not necessarily specific to what happens in the pandemic or what happened in an emergency situation. So the way that we use the letter of intent is that, we try to send it out after that first high level proposal, and we get it out there. We have a couple of options that we use. We use the ADMEI letter of intent often, and it's a very legal-like document, as it's a binding document. And I know it's kind of confusing, because if you read that ADMEI document, the very first thing says it's non-binding, but then you have to read all the excepts. And I spent a lot of time Googling around to try to understand it. I find if I do the research myself, I at least get a better understanding. And then, of course, I called Paul and I was like, Paul Catadella, you got to tell me why this starts out with non-binding. And so we had a really good discussion. And, I think that and then I'm sure Paul will help explain this in a minute, but that's just it's a really good document. Paul built it and it feels that it's defendable. And that's one of the more important things. Paul, do you want to tell us a little bit about it? I know you just took yourself off mute because you knew I was going to ask you.
Yes, definitely. So there's two things I want to address there. And Jill, you did a great job of explaining that. And to piggyback on one of the points you made about volatility, where this letter of intent really came from was trying to address the volatility and the concerns that clients had about DMC volatility, industry volatility, everything that's going on in the marketplace. And what I think this LOI was able to accomplish is it tried to remedy what I described as a catch-22, which is this. DMCs, everything we do, 90 to 95% or more, is pre-program. Program operation encompasses maybe 5% of our overall services rendered. And so if we're going to plan your meeting or event, we need to be able to begin to render services. We're going to incur costs, whether that's in labor or site visits or other things. And clients are very hesitant to get into service agreements that memorialize those terms, that solidify all the terms that come with making sure that DMCs are compensated, that certain cancellation provisions, things like that are all in play, which of course was revealed during the pandemic. And what the letter of intent does in a general conversation with a client is client says, hey, I've got a program coming up. Let's call it 6 to 8 months from now. Great. We need you to start preparing a proposal, put some holds on. Let's get this thing going. Sounds good. Here's our service agreement. Procurement, legal, they're telling us they don't really want us to get into this yet. Can we hold off? At that point in time, I think there's a compromise that can be made. It's not, no, deal breaker, we're done, go away. I think the compromise is, okay, meet me halfway with this letter of intent or letter of engagement. It's a boiled down service agreement, if you will, that has only the substantive provisions necessary to create a handshake. And the handshake states that you're going to provide us X number of dollars in receipt for certain services rendered at this stage of the program cycle. And we can continue planning and we can continue doing everything we need to do to make that event or meeting everything we need it to be. If you handcuff us and expect us to do it a month out, it's never going to happen. So engage us now. Let us do our job, and here's how we can do so. Now, you're right. The letter of intent that I prepared that's sitting with ADMEI presently and the coalition says non-binding in the first paragraph. So everybody knows the way that these documents are drafted, they are a culmination of what the courts and what statutes and what everything that is binding tells us we have to draft it. That gives us the most likelihood of it being enforceable. That's just a bunch of legalese for saying, don't blame me for the way it's drafted. I do this according to how the courts require us, that I think will give us the best chance at actually being able to present it if there was ever a dispute and say, hey, this is enforceable, we're good to go. So Jill, you're right. says non-binding in the first paragraph, except for the following, and it refers to certain provisions in there. It also refers to the most important section, which is the compensation provision, which is X number of dollars in exchange for services rendered up until a certain point in time. That point in time is delineated by either the execution of a service agreement, which automatically terminates the letter of intent, or a date that the parties agree the letter of intent ultimately terminates automatically. That's a date you want to pick to kind of keep the pressure on, in a sense, but make sure that we have a service agreement executed by a date that both parties feel comfortable. So in essence, it is binding under the sense that the law will recognize it as a valid contract. It is not binding as it relates to the parties having to do business with each other. The client can say at a later date, you know what, I appreciate your time. I paid you this amount of dollars to start planning and prepping. Whatever happened, we don't feel comfortable moving forward with the event. Okay, no problem. You're out, and we don't have to address cancellation terms or any of that. We've kept it very simple. It's a 2-page document, and it has worked very, very well so far in addressing that particular situation.
Thank you, Paul. I think it's really crucial to understand the scope of the letter of intent, the flexibility of this tool, and how it can be modified and ratified in the different countries. And we need to become accustomed to this tool so that we can explain it, we can talk about it with our clients. Otherwise, we would never break that wall, because very often we are afraid of what we don't know, right? And so we need to get to know it very well. So once we know the tool, it will be easier to explain it and to use it hopefully more often. Paul Miller, in this case, Paul M. What do you think about European clients or global clients? Because I just want to make sure that we're not always, US centric in our discussions. So do you see a different application or acceptance of this tool globally?
I think after what Paul just said, it's legally binding, but legally binding in the US. And I think that's the key to it, which means really that we have a document. It is legally binding in the US, but you can use it around the world in the spirit that it's intended to be. And so if you would like to make any changes, just obviously no attorney or no lawyer would expect you to change anything like that. But it's really entering into the spirit of a phone call that you would have and feel really good about when somebody says you've won the business, or we'd like to continue working with you and we would like you to do another proposal or two and give us more of your creative ideas. And we're like, well, that's really great. So if I send you a letter of intent, is this going to be okay? And then you can sign this and we've got this agreement. And if we move forward to contract, that's great. But just before then, you still may be getting extra bids. You still may not be getting extra bids. We don't know what type of business it is. We don't know the client. So what's wrong with actually saying, could you just sign this here and just see if we can have some kind of agreement? Now, I would think in a lot of our European clients that we work with, and also what we call long haul, as in Latin America, Australasia, all those other lovely clients that we enjoy coming to the UK, it's a cultural thing as well. The handshake sometimes is enough, but it's, as we've seen, it's not enough. Because this is the whole purpose of what we're doing, is to try to get us compensated for all that work we did when something actually didn't happen. Because we have done our work. We know that so much work is done before the operation, like whether you call it 80-20, 90-10, but it's that all the work, the binders are done, everyone's ready, everything's booked, everything's done. We just have to have the people come and enjoy themselves and have the operation go really well. So we only usually get paid after it's happened. And so why can't the letter of intent actually give us that little stage payments point of being able to say 50%, whatever it is, 30%, whatever you feel, you can decide. But why not have that conversation, and why not have it in writing? That's really, I know that there'll be pushback in Europe. I feel that there will be. I don't know, Lorenzo, whether you would agree. But I do think that it doesn't have to be a 7-page document. It can be looked at. It can be you know what? Let's just send it to this client and see what the reaction is, to Jill's point.
I think that sorry, Lorenzo, I think just to jump in there is that when we've had those conversations and explained it very logically, and again, looking towards that agency model where we don't want to give away all of our ideas. Like an interior designer, they're not going to design your house before you're engaged. You have to pick them based on their criteria. And this letter of intent at least gets you over that hump. And I say, try to use it early on. And every time that we've had a logical conversation with a client with this, they've said, absolutely, I don't know why you haven't been doing this the whole time. People, once we logically tell them, and there's some old dog planners that are just like, absolutely not, that's not the way we do things. But as you explain it, they definitely understand, and they understand the vulnerability, and also that, we're really just trying to make our businesses viable forever and not to be at so much risk with no documents and putting hundreds of hours into a proposal, even not even the binder and all of that. It's that proposal phase that really gets us sometimes.
Yeah, thank you, Jill. And Paul, as you were asking my opinion before, very personal opinion, is that I like the letter of intent as for what it is. That is just another tool for me to start a conversation. I am a big fan of conversations, and I think conversations can really lead up to great results. So we need, but we're all different. Someone needs a draft, someone needs a tool, someone needs a template, someone needs a contract, someone just needs to pick up the phone, right? So we're all different, but we're all doing the same business. So I like what is happening is that everybody's recognizing the value of the content that we are trying to put out there. So we are changing the focus. We are telling you guys, we're always being paid for what we do. We're not complaining because we're not paid for our job, right? For the work that we do. But normally we're just paid in phase 3 or stage 4, right? So everything is pushed back. So what we're trying to say here is these business models are not sustainable. So we are approaching it from different perspective, the life cycle, the program life cycle, the letter of intent, the pricing models that we're going into right now. So these are all different pieces of the same puzzle that speak about, we need to be remunerated in a more sustainable way for what we do. So I am very much like you, Paul. We have very different clients from Australia to the US with very different approaches. Some doesn't even want to see a service agreement contract. They just don't want it. They just, not even a sheet of paper, just not even a handshake, just, okay, it's confirmed. But it's so different, but we need to try to give solid foundations. We need to try to give a best practice. And so I think that this letter of intent or letter of engagement needs to have a widespread out in our industry. I think it's going to do good to us. So the more we understand it, the more we understand how to use it, I think the better it will be for everyone.
Just to add to that, there would be an argument to say, well, why would you just do the letter of intent? Just go straight into the service agreement or just go straight to the contract. But more and more now, we are seeing that you're given the business, which is great, but they don't really know what they want to do yet. Or we know that we want this venue, but we haven't decided, and we have to come on another site, and months and months and months could go by before you actually have a contract and the client has decided what the whole program is going to be. So the letter of intent, however big or small you would like to have it, it's there in the spirit, like I said, of working and that you're engaged with this piece of business, and that there's a part in there that allows you to put in the compensation you will have along the way before the contract, or however you would like to agree it. It's that one commitment from the client that why wouldn't they sign something that says we want to work with you pending a formal contract? That really is, and then whatever is in the middle, because they've already given you the phone call. And so that's the pushback that you could kind of get. There's a lot of work, now the legal, because you've got to go through it all again with the contract, but it doesn't have to be that difficult. Yeah.
I totally agree, Paul. All right, great conversation. I could stay here for hours. We're doing well, actually, with our timing. We're 40 minutes in. I see some questions are starting to come in the Q&A. We're going to keep them for the end, but if you like, just make sure to enter your question there. Next topic in line is actually that's where we were leading, pricing and time tracking. So as I said before, we've always been paid for what we do, right? So we're not trying to change the rule. We're just saying we should have a more sustainable model for the way we remunerate. So we have Robin Bass on the stage now. So Robin, would you like to give it a shot to the topic?
Absolutely. First of all, I just want to say, hi, everybody, my dear friends. It's so nice to see you. Next, we're going to go into time tracking. And the reason why we're going to talk about time tracking is because it really is going to be such an essential tool that you could use that leads back to everything that we're talking about, right? So if we're going to start adopting a letter of engagement and asking for progress payments in that stage, it's especially going to be valuable for us in stage 2 when we spend the majority of our time. We need to know internally how much time it takes our team and our resources, right, to get that job done. Otherwise, you say, okay, we're going to start charging for our time in stages. How do we know what that is? So this just provides us internally the ability to really understand what the cost of doing business is for us, right? And also, you're going to have clients that externally are going to ask for this, but we are billing ourselves, and we are consultants to our clients. We're guiding them on this journey of coming up with the perfect program, right? We're thinking about it in the shower. What's the best thing for specific clients? If we start thinking about how much time it's taking us, we need to be able to track that and know. It's going to make us better business owners and better people in business to understand the value and what it's costing us. But also then if we, all of our pricing models, we're not trying to change all the pricing models. They are all the same. We're still doing all of the normal ones that we do. We want to add time tracking to the equation. So clients that ask for that and want to pay us. And I would encourage everybody to go out there and look at what consultants charge right now, because a lot of us are actually charging, if we look back at what the cost of our time is, it's really just this hourly rate that does not have the proprietary knowledge attached that is what we give them in consulting, not something that they can Google, not something they can do if they're not familiar with our destinations. There's a huge value to that. So us being able to track that gives us, it is the agency model, right? It's the agency model. And I can tell you that I wish I would have done a better job. I wish I would have done a better job at that pre-COVID, because I would have come out a whole lot better. So when we've all been talking about this in ways that we can now improve the practices that we have been doing, time tracking will allow you to be able to understand how much it actually costs to do business. So the goal is to create a better practice kind of moving forward, so we won't get stuck like we did the last time.
Yeah, Robin, as you said, we probably all learned the hard way, right, during COVID. So this time track, someone was using it already before, and I think has had a great advantage when COVID hit. But I think that these 16 months or whatever what they are have given us a great opportunity to really look into our businesses and do some some research on that. And I think we're all more ready now as we get over it. So, Robin, can we try to help our viewers with some resources, some tools? So can you share some of your experience on what do you use for time tracking?
Well, what we used is Harvest. We used Harvest, and that allowed everybody on our team to be able to track their hours. But you can also go with T-Sheets, something like that. So Harvest or T-Sheets, but there's a few more out there. You just need to make sure that it's compatible with the other softwares that you're running.
Sorry, I was on mute now. All right. So thank you for sharing that. I think that, yes, these are the names that more often really I've heard in other calls, and there are so many out there, right? So let's just, everybody needs to find the most adequate for its own business, his own or her own business model. Okay, so thank you very much for this, Robin. And with this, we have covered the main topics we had around the thesis of that has been published by the DMC coalition. We do have some questions, and then I would like to pass it over to Paul Cotadella for some closing remarks. So let's go to the questions. So the first one, I would like Jill, if you can share your experience, because Shannon is asking if the new letter of intent, if someone tested it. Can you share something?
Absolutely. Hi, Shannon. So yes, we have used the new letter of intent and we've been successful with it. Shannon's full question said, I don't know if everybody can see them, but the question was, in her mind, the letter of intent is a very simple, quick document that does not have to go through legal, but it sets you up for just more, it feels more casual, like that handshake agreement. We've used both, and honestly, we continue to oscillate between the two. So the original ADMEI agreement that we had in 2019 was that very quick one-pager that just said, you're committing to this. When we use either of them, back to Robin's point, we often will say, add a line to them to say, this amount of money, this non-refundable deposit is equivalent to 10 hours of work or 15 hours of work that's going to get us hopefully to the point where we can actually sign a full contract and get it to the point of going through legal and all of that. And we also, as part of the focus group, had a lot of conversations about the very same thing, do we want it to have to go through legal? And if we make it look really legalese, does that hold the process up anymore? And I think it really depends client to client, and again, on that relationship that you might have. I know that Paul has said, that the newest one is the most defendable, and I think that he's had experience defending it to some extent. So I don't think that the other one is completely not defendable. It's just a whole lot harder, would be my suggestion or thought. And I do think that Shannon mentioned, we typically have used it when you need to secure a venue and they need a deposit right away, or you're securing a band and you need that deposit right away, but you're not ready to finish finalizing the piece. And I totally agree. That's exactly how we'd used it in the past. But in this new model that we're looking at, we're really trying to use it all the time to bridge that gap before we spend 30 hours writing a proposal that has every detail covered, and we've designed the menus and we've picked the linen and all of that. So that's the difference of using it today more often as you can. I hope that helped.
Thank you very much, Jill. We have two questions from my friend Rutger. So the first one, I would like to pass it on to Paul Cotadella. Paul C. About the international legal standing of the LOI.
Good question. So kind of piggybacking on what Paul Miller had said earlier about the international standing, and something that I've come to learn working with more internationally based DMCs is that, of course, it differs upon cultures and borders. Many countries are far less litigious than us in the United States. More power to you. I wish that was the case here. But being a lawyer has become a very sort of necessary evil in the United States, as opposed to other places where the letter of intent can be agreed upon based on a handshake. I think as I always recommend, the letter of intent or any document that's drafted should always be this sort of reference that is shared with your local attorney or team that says, hey, it's got to require these tweaks. Once we get these through, then the true spirit and intent of the document will shine. And that's what those documents are about, including the LOI, is the intended purpose, which is to bridge that gap that we talked about earlier. So if it's something that's not well received or not commonly received in another jurisdiction, including internationally based, I think that's something that I would certainly love to learn more about in those respective jurisdictions to see what it would take to get there. And of course, sort of how normalized it may become, even if we are not able to perfect it legally, but utilize it somehow to create something that we can all agree upon that can be used as that foundation to bridge that gap. So I would definitely tell Rutger, to chat with their, local representative to see just how well it can be integrated, because I think the overall purpose of the document certainly will serve that intent very well.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. All right, so we have the other question of Rutger, and yeah, I know the panel of IRF, and I've been so sorry not to be able to travel there, but I know you guys did a great job with, thank you to Kelsey, to Rutger, and Joey Fijol, right? So you guys shown, and thank you for taking, it hasn't been easy to face planners and talk about this freely, right? So the first times is always hard. So I understand there could have been some pushback, but I would like to call in Paul Miller to answer your question, Rutger, because I think that Paul has something to share.
Hello, Rutger. Good question. One of the things really that we must take from this is that we are not advocating that every DMC goes to a time management fee model. As Robin did point out, the way we do business is not changing. All the different ways that we can charge. And sometimes it's good that you actually ask a client, how would you like us to earn our money? So that could be, as we all know, there are many, but it's the cost plus, the management fee, just flat fee, time management if you're measuring. But what Robin was trying to get at is that how will you know how much you've done if you haven't tracked the time? So if you know from a piece of business that you've just marked up however many %, you know what that end figure really roughly would be. So then you have to break that end figure down and say, I want 50% of it here, I want 20% of it here, and 30% of it here, and that's your fees. How you work that out is entirely internal and what you do yourselves. But I did notice on your comment, Rutger, that if that was the IRF meeting, that was not what the whole idea is, not to change how we do business with our clients. That is for us to decide, not as an industry that now we're advocating that everybody goes with a time management model. That's not what we're doing. And I think it would be dangerous if we did even try to go that way. So hopefully that's clear.
Excellent. Paul, you wanna add something?
Yeah, please. I thought that was very well put. And the only thing that I would add to that, relating back to what you had referenced earlier on in this conversation, Lorenzo, was about the importance of the nomenclature, the verbiage, how we're using certain words to describe what it is we're doing. And it plays in very well to what Paul had just said, which is everybody's model will be slightly different, and that's perfectly acceptable. It's really a description in how you communicate what it is you're earning and when that will need to read in we're putting on the legal hat in your contract, but even more importantly, how that is conveyed to your client in just a general conversation and being able to understand how it is that those terms are going to apply, and using different nomenclature, using different words to describe these things. I think before, many of us just said, hey, they're all deposits. The deposit comes in, the deposit comes out, the deposit goes here, the deposit goes there. I think now there needs to be an emphasis, and this is what we worked on exclusively within the coalition, talking about certain terms as it relates to payments versus deposits. And what is a payment? What is a progress payment? What is a deposit? When are certain deposits defined as such? When are you seeking them, and how much is reasonable depending upon where you're at in the cycle, the program cycle? All these things start to come together really nicely when there's that comprehensive understanding as to how they work together and how you can blend the legal with the communicative sort of approach to all of your client relations and what it is we're trying to convey and make a little bit more normal. That's the only thing I could add to Paul's comments there. And I think that was very well put.
Excellent. Thank you, panel. All right, so we are doing great. We're 5 minutes to the hour, and we just have the time for, I said something, just another question popped up. Thanks, guys. Okay, great. Okay, thank you, Rutger. Okay, that's not a question. So that's great to have it anyway. Thank you. So I have some minutes. I would like to allow Paul Cotadella for some closing remarks, if you don't mind, and then we'll wrap this up.
Certainly. Thanks, Lorenzo. I really just want to thank everybody that's here on this webinar. First of all, obviously the panelists have worked very hard to put this together, and including all the ADMEI members, DMCC members, everybody here that took the time to assemble this. As I said before, change is not easy, and there's typically some resistance there from some, and being able to kind of push through that and continue to try to normalize these things, I think is incredibly important. And of course, a huge thanks to the attendees. Those that are here obviously have an interest in what the heck is going on in the industry and have been involved for probably quite some time well before this. And I think just the amount of attendees we have here today and having this conversation, it speaks for itself in terms of how important these issues are and where I think they can go. The trick is going to be continued education, continued discussions, more knowledge, more understanding around these things, and asking hard questions. And continuing to develop these concepts. So, based on the experiences that I've had, that we have all had here so far, I think that it's sort of an organic process. It will continue to grow. It will continue to develop. It will continue to be improved. Changes will be made. But I think here we have a really strong foundation for what could be a very positive impact on our industry. Again, relating back to longstanding issues that I think necessitated improvement, but we're going to try to turn a pandemic into some sort of silver lining here. And I think we're doing it. So I appreciate it. Lorenzo, thank you for the opportunity. And that's all.
All right. I wanted to thank you, Paul, and I would like to thank everybody at the DMC Coalition. It's been a journey working together on this, and I think we provided great value to the DMC industry at large, and I look forward to other projects like this. My closing comment is that if we really want to make a change, as we said before, we're not setting new rules, right? We're just trying to be sensitive and sensible and make our industry more sensible towards a sustainable business model for DMCs. We need to start from our own companies, sharing information, as we said before, getting accustomed to use these documents, these resources, these tools, and to get these conversations out with the clients. I think I had a song from Michael Jackson that came in, The Man in the Mirror. If you want to start the change, right? If you want to change a word, start with the man in the mirror, right? So I think that's really what we have to do. We have to start from our own little backyard, and again, it's not a revolution, as Val very intelligently said. It's evolution. We're not changing things. We're just moving on. So we need the help of everybody. So next time you do the 5th or 10th revision, ask yourself if that is the time to stop doing a 10th revision for free, and is that the right time to put forward a letter of intent or a call with your client and saying, hey, really? So with that being said, I think we're done. It's 6 o'clock in Italy, time for aperitives. I'm sorry for you guys that it's still, in the middle of a working day. Any final words from my lovely panelists? You're all good?
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Okay.
Let's do this.
Lisa.
Thank you all, and thank you to all the 90+ viewers we've had. So thanks for joining us. Ciao.